In the interest of time, we have colleagues online as well. So thank you very much. Let me start with a deep gratitude to all who have joined us in person and online. I believe everyone is extremely busy and for such important themes is also important. So thank you for gathering on this subject. I am honored to introduce a very illustrious panel. This discussion will be moderated by who is Professor of International Business, having served in Norway, Pakistan, and teaching in various universities in Pakistan and the region, also serves as a visiting fellow at STPI. This will be followed by introductory remarks including Ms. Anita Arshad, who's program manager with FNF Pakistan, our partners, STPI's partners for this meeting. We'll do a small technical presentation, or we will have the report in your hands. We'll still have a small agenda setting presentation by my colleague, Mahmoud Rashid from STPI. And a discussion if I can use she's a private sector specialist from Pakistan office. Thank you for joining, really appreciate. Research Fellow at Institute of Policy Studies. Thank you, Asanka, for joining online.
Bangladesh, we have Dr. Salim Rehan, who's Executive Director of SEM, very senior professor and faculty at the University of Dhaka, also serves at various roles and board positions in the government of Bangladesh. And I think there will be this will be followed by an open discussion, and we look forward to being guided by all the stakeholders.
So we join us today from the public sector, from the private sector. This is a mutual endeavor. And I'm sure that there is room for improvement before these recommendations go to regional bodies and the ministries in the relevant countries. Let me also thank many of you who have actually contributed to the important growth of diagnostics as well as the study. It was conducted as part of this research. Some of you went through the transcripts of survey and interviews and validated those positions as well. So I'm really grateful for that as well. So with this, I'll hand over to Dr. Arif.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar, and thanks to STPI, Frederick Norman Foundation for Freedom Pakistan, for joining hands for this very important work. While reading this report, so I was just able to recall one of the anecdote from in 2016. Actually, I was attending one of the event like this one that was about foreign direct investment, and I asked a question to Mr. You can say that Kumhede Andhra, former CEO of Mitsubishi, that what you're looking for Pakistan in Pakistan as a market, and he said one simple sentence, that is, we are looking for level playing field. And while reading this report, I was just recalling this again and again, because while sharing the same planet, but actually the different genders do not share the same gravity, that the gravity is different. For example, if we look at with respect to challenges in especially Southeast Asia for women, so it seemed that that women are living at Jupiter and we are living on Earth, because in Jupiter, that the gravity level is 5.5 times higher than on Earth. So it is very, therefore, the work such as this one, this is again very, very important. And with respect to its methodology, again, it also impressed me a lot with respect to its robust methodology, that that the team, including Mahanur and Dr. Vakar, it is not only desk research, but also consultation, qualitative interviews with very important stakeholders, and but also that a survey as well the women, and that is such a, you can say that mixed method that I believe that contributed a lot towards the development of this particular report. Surely we will have very interesting insights from not only the presentation from Mahanur, so the discussion from our very august panel members. But I would also like to highlight one important information that I observed, and definitely I would look for some better understanding on this one as well. Like, for example, according to this report, that mobile phone ownership among females in Sri Lanka it's 72%, Bangladesh 58%, and India and Pakistan 43%, and so is the ranking with respect to internet use of internet as well. So if we can all, we are reasonably well informed that with respect to Bangladesh, that Grameen Bank, that after empowering women with respect to finance, it also entered into telecom as well. So we can assume that it contributed a lot towards you can say that technology literacy with respect to females in Bangladesh. But I will request definitely our respectable panel members from Sri Lanka, Dr. Mr. Asanka Vijayasinghe, that what may explain this very interesting or very impressive figure about Sri Lanka, not only with respect to mobile phone ownership, but also with respect to the internet usage as well. But at the same time, that with respect to methodology, that I would also like to not only create a question, but also would like some interesting discussion on this as well. Like, for example, when a respondent say, I don't know what internet is, it doesn't mean that the person don't know about the internet, that we can't assume that. Because you can see, if you just look at with respect to Pakistan, that the people, despite this, that they are illiterate, but despite this, that they are using internet very much, and they are very much connected to this world as well. So looking forward for this very interesting event, and we have this not only this presentation, panel discussion, but also some very interesting closing remarks from Dr. Vakar as well. And with this, I will request Mr. Anika for presentation, a very brief presentation on this. But before this, I'm again thank you to all, not only the people here, the people who have joined online, our panel members, and definitely STPI and Frederick Naumann Foundation for joining hands for this very important work that I hope that it will contribute to our better understanding about what we should do in order to improve or reduce the gravity for the females on this planet Earth. Thank you. Ms. Anika.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arif. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all. It's an honor to have you here, and thank our partner STPI for this pivotal publication that I know the team has been working on all of 2023, and now we thought it was the right time to also share it with the public, launch it. As I've been introduced, I'm Anika Arshad, the program manager for Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom Pakistan. We are a German political foundation established in Germany in 1958, and we have over 60 country offices worldwide. And in Pakistan, we've been working since 1986, together with our partner organizations like STPI and many others, also with public stakeholders. We are committed to promoting civic education, good governance practices, democratic values, individual freedom, and responsible citizenship, along with gender empowerment and a more increased role for women in society. The comprehensive study that Mahanur and Dr. Vakar have very, I know the number of drafts and comments we've been through, so I know they've worked very diligently and worked very hard to produce this and shed light on the vital role of women entrepreneurship that is played in the trade sector across South Asia, and also the multifaceted challenges they face. Today, we will also, I expect the honorable panelists to also delve into the crucial and often overlooked aspect of our regional economies, the indispensable role that women play in shaping and driving trade, as well as the challenges and opportunities they face, particularly women-focused, women-led firms. And we all know that the South Asian trade is a very dynamic landscape. So I hope that our distinguished panelists will be able to shed more light on these aspects. For me, I will be sharing some key points that they were basically the key takeaways for me as an individual, as a woman, and somebody who's working in the field of economics and trade for the past couple of years. I think the biggest challenge that we have, which also leads to basically barriers to integration, would be social cultural challenges. We know that women in South Asia face significant social cultural barriers that restrict their participation, whether it's gender-based discrimination, whether it's mobility constraints. We have a lot of controlling societal norms and limited access to business networks. I mean, I do not like saying this, but all the men, they tend to network in a manner that women are often left out of discussion or these networking practices. Then financial constraints, access to finance remains a major hurdle, and women-focused firms struggle to secure necessary funding to scale their businesses. And in Pakistan, we find it's particularly challenging because it's sort of assurities that banks ask women. I mean, it's never good enough for you to be a woman leading a business, being an entrepreneur. They will need some men to guarantee you, for them to authorize that, okay, yeah, she works well enough for you to finance her. Then technological gaps, unfortunately, digital literacy, and we see some parts of South Asia. Although I would also make the statement that it is existing over a much larger part. It's not negligible, something we can't ignore. So this also limits them from integrating into global trade networks. And now we know that anybody who's left out of either the global value chains or the global trade networks, then your product might not be able to scale up or gain as much value. Then the role of the public sector. Unfortunately, because of a lot of reasons, I would also comment on Pakistan that trust with regards to public sectors is not a lot for entrepreneurs, for business people. The environment and policies are such that they do not make a very conducive environment for running a business, for registering a business. So often these businesses also remain in the gray economy. They're informal, unregistered. So I would like to say that government policies play a crucial role that our study also validates, and to create an enabling environment, inclusive policymaking, awareness initiatives, structured public-private dialogue processes are all essential to address the barriers that women face. For the private sector, they can support women entrepreneurs by enhancing their online presence, providing capacity building opportunities. I think this is one thing that is being done very rigorously, and I, representative of the FNF Pakistan, can tell you that we've been working for the past 5 years with women entrepreneurs, and we realize that no matter how much we build their capacity, unless there's a conducive policy environment, there's conducive policy, business-friendly policy, capacity building can only take them to a limit. And here again, I would like to thank SDPI, that they've been a very essential and intrinsic to translating our practical capacity building work and merging it with policy for the government and putting forward comprehensive recommendations that I hope at some level all of you will be able to take away and get implemented as well. For empowerment strategies, I think we need 3 core focus areas. The first one would be financial and digital literacy. The second would be capacity building to help women navigate and overcome not just technical challenges, but I think now several studies prove that the psychological barriers that women face, they're far worse, and your brain is the first thing that limits you from growing, from taking that next step. So I think we need to also focus on women women's own psychological barriers and women leaders. What stops them? What can further build them? And the study also emphasizes on the need for inclusive policy. I think the number of times Pakistan has established economic councils, we have seen that it's just a room full of men. I mean, please, it's a request and also a demand. Please take the women into account as well. We have something to share, and you can't leave behind 50% of the population when you're making policy. What I really like about SDPI's overall work is that they always try to give it a global relevance. And so they highlight in this study that findings contribute directly to achieving SDG 5, which is gender equality, and SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, all across in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. And by addressing gender-specific barriers in trade, we can promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, creating decent work opportunities for all. This is also a moment for us to promote regional collaboration. We see that a lot of regions flourish, and we have an excellent example for North America as well as for the European Union, that we as a region need to work more into integration. And I think especially Pakistan, because the rest of the countries are still but in South Asia collaborating, doing mutual trade. They have trade treaties, but our policies, unfortunately, especially with trade, are very closed off and protectionist. I think we also need to let go of that. I will now be concluding in saying that empowering women in trade is not just a matter of economic necessity, but it is also a pathway to achieving broader social environmental goals, also economic, of course. Women entrepreneurs are more likely to reinvest their profits in their communities, contributing to local infrastructure, education, environmental sustainability, and healthy families. As we move forward, let us commit to dismantling the barriers that hold back women entrepreneurs and women in trade, and work together to create inclusive and a thriving trade environment in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anika, for highlighting the very important aspects of the report, and especially the psychological barrier that you referred to. It's also very important that believing in themselves, that is very that may be the beginning for creating their own very important space. Now I will request Ms. Mahanur Arshad for a presentation of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arif. So basically in my presentation, I'll just be summarizing what this report has been all about, our findings, and then recommendations through consultations with different stakeholders as well. So first of all, I'll just run us through the contents of our presentation today. Firstly, I'll be talking about the objectives of our study. Secondly, I'll be talking about the methodology, then the literature review, and then the findings through our consultations, which include limitations faced by women-focused firms to integrate globally, and the role that the public and private sector plays in all of this, right? And lastly, of course, there will be recommendations as well. Is this not working? Okay. So firstly, the objectives of the study. The study has been primarily focused on answering these four questions or focus areas, you can say. Firstly, how women can benefit from the pre-existing trade agreements that are already there, and what are the best case scenarios that we can follow in the South Asian region. Secondly, how have women-focused firms integrated globally, regionally and globally, because of market access arrangements that are there on ground. Thirdly, what are the various gaps in the different subsectors that are present across agriculture, for example, industry, services, where the women-focused firms could not gain their, anticipated gains. And lastly, of course, there will be talk about the roles of the public and private sectors in this scenario, and the policy recommendations for the public sector, private sector, regulatory spaces, and all the other stakeholders that should be involved in this process. As Anika mentioned, this report, of course, it does aim at fulfilling all of the Sustainable Development Goals, but particularly it is directly aimed to achieve SDG 5 and 8, which are SDG 5 being achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls, and SDG 8, which is promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and full and productive employment and decent work for all. It stops working in between. Next, next. Right. So the methodology that we used for this is we started off with a detailed literature review of academic publications that were by development partners, academic and think tank institutions in the SAARC countries that we're focusing on in this study. Through the information that we gathered and the data we gathered through this literature review, it really helped us in formulating the questions and the research instruments that we then used for 25 key informant interviews with government and non-government officials, 2 focus group discussions, and 1 roundtable session, which included government participation and former parliamentarians as well. And of course, there was a farm level survey of about 250 women-owned and women-managed businesses across Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Next. So, diving into before I dive into the literature review, I'd just like to say that we ensured no stakeholder was left behind. We basically used this stakeholder cube method, and with that, we charted out an entire table of stakeholders. Firstly, we have stakeholders with high interest and high power, and they're referred to as influential active backers, and these include the federal and provincial governments, intergovernmental bodies, development partner organizations, and South Asian policy think tanks. Then there are stakeholders with high interest and low power, and they're referred to as influential passive backers. And these stakeholders included mainstream chambers of commerce and industries, industrial and export associations, SAARC Chamber of Commerce and Industries, central banks in the region, and media. Then we had stakeholders with low interest and high power. These included bodies under SAARC Secretariat and academia. Next. So now I'd like to begin with the literature review. Next. So basically, with the help of data, we charted out this table, which is essentially a South Asia women's health snapshot. So as we can see, South Asia does see a rise in women assuming public office. However, you still see that government spending on women's education and health continues to remain stagnant and low. And you can see that there are a lot of nil boxes in this table, and that was primarily because the data for this is still quite absent. And these are very important aspects because women's sexual reproductive health, women's education, things like these do improve your economic growth of the country as well. As I've mentioned here, also investment in girls' education equips them with valuable skills, but it also contributes to a more skilled workforce, and it increases productivity and innovation. And it cannot be denied that improved health outcomes for women are linked to economic gains. So basically, countries with high levels of gender equality do see a rise in female entrepreneurship. And this not only leads to women economic empowerment, but it also brings about improvement in other factors such as business landscape diversification, promoting innovation, and a boost in the trade competitiveness in the global market. So trade linkages that are facilitated by bilateral and multilateral agreements are important for stability and growth in global economies. So there are several examples of these. For example, GSP Plus has empowered women by enhancing the accessibility to European markets, particularly in sectors like apparel. Then regional trade agreements like SAFTA, which is basically an evidence that South Asian region is committed to improve economic growth and stability. There are initiatives like the SAARC Bazaar and the South Asia Economic Summit, which enable women-led enterprises to showcase their ideas, products, and services across borders. Then there are free trade agreements as well, which offer potential for integrating women-owned and women-led businesses in the global and regional economies. So despite the potential of these initiatives, and they're very promising, for example, SAFTA to promote trade and economic growth in South Asia, the reality, however, is still quite different. If I talk about the SAFTA trade agreements, they've fallen short of expectations. SAFTA faces criticism for its limited impact on promoting trade, particularly for women-led businesses. So gender-specific barriers further impede women's engagement in, regional and international trade under SAFTA. And some of these barriers do include unequal access to finance, limited business networks, and lack of training and support services tailored for women entrepreneurs. Trade agreements, if they're not designed with gender lens, they can exacerbate existing inequalities. So, it's very important to look towards best practices of countries that have started sort of implementing the gender lens into their trade agreements and amending it accordingly. And of course, failing to address these structural barriers and not promoting gender-inclusive trade agreements could lead to missed economic opportunities for Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, because of course, we cannot deny the fact that this is about half of the population here that still is, a victim to psychological barriers like Anika mentioned, and many other such similar problems. Next. So now I'll be moving on to the next section of our study, which are findings based on our consultations, the surveys, and the key informant interviews. So firstly, I'm going to talk about limitations faced by women-focused firms to integrate globally. And I put these pictures in on purpose. The first one just shows how the woman is still quite below the glass ceiling. And the other one in the race to achieving, a winning situation in their careers, the hurdles that women have to face, and what is the situation for men on the other hand. Next. So before I move on to all the limitations one by one, there's this overall table that I would all want you to have a look at, which is from the Women, Business and Law 2024 2.0 indicator scores report. So while all of these indicator scores, which are out of 100, by the way, are quite alarming and disappointing, I've particularly highlighted entrepreneurship and assets in red because of the relevance to the topic. So if we look at entrepreneurship, the legal framework score, the supportive framework score, or the expert opinion score are well below 50 out of 100 for all three countries. And the same goes for assets as well, which is quite sad and alarming because we keep talking about access to credit and financial services, but when they go to banks, they're turned down because they do not have access to collateral, for example. So these scores basically do paint a very sort of discouraging and disappointing picture of the current scenario in South Asia for these three particular countries. Next. So the first challenge, the limitation that I'm going to be talking about, is socio-cultural challenges. There's no denying the fact that women all over the world bear the responsibility of household chores in addition to their personal aspirations with regards to their careers. COVID-19 was a perfect example of this. Several women-led, women-focused firms shut down because the burden of household duties increased manifold due to the lockdown on women. And of course, when we compare the female and male workforce participation, on the left, we have the female percentage, and on the right, we have the male percentage. So the male percentage falls somewhere between 70 to 80% for all three countries. However, on the other side, in female, the labor force participation falls between about 24% to 38%, which is a stark difference. So, of course, this can be attributed to two things: the traditional barriers that come in. There are several remote areas where women are not allowed to work at all, but then majority of the women do fall in the informal sector. They're informally employed. According to ILO estimates, about 91% women are employed informally. Next. So second is limited access to digital technology. Even in this day and age, there are a great number of women and men as well who do not have access to mobile phones. So this graph basically is showing that. So for Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, the percentages of women who have mobile ownership have been circled. For Sri Lanka, it's around 72%. For Pakistan, it's 43%. And for Bangladesh, it is around 58%, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so apart from mobile ownership, next. When it comes to internet use, again, these are very low numbers. For Sri Lanka, it's 30% women use the internet. For Pakistan, it's 12%. And for Bangladesh, 7% women. And when this was further looked into and delved into, on the next slide, there's a table which there's a table which sort of shows us the reasons for not using the internet. And unfortunately, the vast majority of women, so it's 69% women in Bangladesh, 76% women in Pakistan, and 37% women in Sri Lanka who said that I do not know what the internet is, even in this day and age. And when I first came across these numbers, I really needed a minute to absorb this, because how can you be entrepreneurs if you don't have internet access, Next. So there are other limitations that also plague the trade space and does not really encourage it to become more inclusive. So there are informal enterprises and market integration barriers. So I've talked about informal enterprises prior as well. So when it comes to market integration barriers, a lot of these women, because they're unregistered businesses, they're unable to become exporters. And so they fall under the category of the very commonly used phrase, which is suitcase traders. So because of that, they're unable to sort of, get their exports on a very larger level, right? So secondly, there's limited access to finance, which is a great hurdle for women, because majority of the times financial power and autonomy is with the men, not just of the house, but of the organizations, etc. as well. Then there are weak capacity building opportunities, there's lack of business networks and support, and then there are policy and regulatory barriers. And the policy and regulatory barriers can be when it comes to the registration process, bureaucratic processes, other bureaucratic processes as well, right? Next. So next, I'll be talking about the role of the public and private sectors in empowering women in trade. So when it comes to the public sector, there are quite encouraging and promising moves by the government, which shows their willingness to integrate women into the trade milieu. Bangladesh, for example, the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs and the Ministry of Information and the Ministry of ICT collaborated and are providing trainings to women on digital trade for empowering them and training the female entrepreneurs, right? Then the planning division of the government of Bangladesh also devised their 8th five-year plan with emphasis on increasing their economic participation. When it comes to Pakistan, the Trade Development Authority of Pakistan ensures that women representation does take place by giving them subsidy when these women do want to participate. SMEDA, Small Medium Enterprises Development Authority, launched Women Business Development Center in Mingora, Swat, for example. And then there's the 5 E's framework by the Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiatives as well. When it comes to Sri Lanka, the Export Development Board has launched the Women Entrepreneurs Development Program, which focuses on empowering women as MSMEs for trade. And on their website, they've mentioned that over 800 businesses have registered. National Policy on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, which was also launched by the Ministry of Women, Children Affairs and Social Empowerment on International Women's Days, is yet another example where the governments are willing to take this topic forward. Next. However, despite these notable sort of initiatives and attempts by the government, there's still a lot of gaps which are preventing women from fully integrating into the trade space. And the major reason for this is lack of data. We cannot have evidence-informed policymaking if we do not have the data. And I, for one, know this is a big challenge, because when I was researching for this report, it really was a task trying to gather data from online sources. So, and of course, the statistics reflect that as well. The Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics states about 24.6% of these SMEs there are just women-owned. Pakistan says that only 1% female entrepreneurs are there compared to 21% male entrepreneurs. And Sri Lanka ADB reflects that only 25% of entrepreneurs are women-led, right? So intuitively, these numbers are quite low. And it really does bring to question that the data, of course, there are many reasons that the data is not present. Informal enterprises, women are unable to register, they find the process quite cumbersome, so on and so forth. The governments also fail to facilitate women in successfully acquiring requisite financial sources. There are a lot of women who I interviewed, and some of them, for example, this one woman, I still remember, I was talking to her on call and I asked her, why were you unable to register? And I remember she said, please give me a second, let me go to the other room. And she went to the other room and then she said, my mother was there, so I didn't want to sit in front of her, but there's a lot of harassment when it comes to government offices. And if I was to say this in front of my mother, she would probably stop me from going again. So I mean, the fear is there, and then these barriers are there, which is a huge problem. And the current bilateral FTAs that between Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, they have a lot of space for expansion and trade diversification. Currently, they focus on certain sectors, and women-specific sectors are not entirely included and covered. Next. So next, I'll be talking about the private sector. They have, of course, again, the private sector has been showing interest and initiative for women economic empowerment. If I talk about Bangladesh, the women comprise of 60 to 7% of the ready-made garments workforce, which is Bangladesh's biggest import earning sector, right? Under the Federation of Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry, women chambers and 4 business associations emerged to be pivotal platforms for these women entrepreneurs to access the trade markets. When it comes to Pakistan, the Federation of Pakistan Chambers of Commerce and Industry reports 27 women chambers that have been registered. FPCCI has announced a 50% membership fee waiver for women standing committees as well, so that women's presence in the trade milieu can be encouraged. And lastly, Sri Lanka has the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and Industry is working quite efficiently to provide women with networking opportunities, knowledge platforms, and support collaborations as well. Next. So, of course, there are gaps and opportunities here as well. There's lack of up-to-date information on the websites. There's lack of public-private partnerships, and this can be owed to the trust deficit that exists between the public and the private sectors. The private sector feels that the public sector is quite unresponsive, and the environment is non-conducive to and not very accepting of sort of new initiatives and new ideas. The women chambers are usually also sidelined, and matters pertaining to women businesses are often not prioritized. Next. So lastly, I'll be talking about the recommendations that were sort of extracted from our conversations and our consultations with different stakeholders. Firstly, it's inclusive policymaking to promote women in trade, without which we cannot move further. Like Anika also mentioned earlier, we can keep doing all these capacity building initiatives, but if our doing business enabling environment is not there, we cannot really take things forward. I'll give an example of this. In the recent budget, it was announced about the Tajir Dost scheme, which is great that they're trying to encourage the registration of businesses. But the question then again comes, how have you tried to make it more easy for women entrepreneurs, right? If they want to register, what one-window operations are you providing, so on and so forth. Secondly, making available evidence and data regarding women in trade. So the first one and the second recommendation, they go hand in hand. If we do not have data readily available, we cannot have informed and evidence-based policy making. Thirdly, we have awareness initiatives to overcome social cultural barriers. So as we all know that something that Anika also mentioned, there are psychological barriers that are present. And I'd say not just in women, but then in men as well. A lot of men do not let their women step out. They're intimidated by their economic independence, for example, things like that. So I think both the men and women need awareness, need to be given awareness initiatives to overcome these social cultural barriers. So, and then there's orientation and capacity building of existing women enterprises as well. Fourthly, there's capacity building of individuals from relevant public and private sector entities. You know, if we educate our women entrepreneurs, but at the same time, when they go to the banks, whether it's the state bank, it's commercial banks, and the environment there is not conducive, and your officials do not really treat them in a way that, you know, any respectable entrepreneur would want to be treated, any individual would want to be treated. So the environment cannot be improved, the process cannot be streamlined and formalized as we anticipate and want it to be. Of course, there's structured public-private dialogue process. It's very important to bring the public and the private sector on board if we want to foster public-private partnerships. There's enhancing online presence to attract funding for women networks. So if we do not show current success stories or current work that's happening, how will we sort of attract potential funding or potential development partners to actually come into our countries and invest? Then there's empowering women in trade through financial access. So as I mentioned earlier as well, women face a lot of barriers when it comes to lack of collateral when they want to get loans, right? So this can be addressed in a number of ways, which includes improving our inheritance laws, for example, but also providing access to credit and financial services, which might not really be falling in the formal channel, right? But they can help out the women who are from far-flung areas or impoverished regions. We also have a recommendation about empowering women in trade through financial literacy. So financial access is important, but it cannot. But financial literacy and financial access go hand in hand. If, for example, I do have an asset on my name, but I do not know how to make good use of it, efficient use of it, what point is of that asset to me, right? So financial literacy and also understanding the financial sector is very important for these women entrepreneurs. Product and market diversification under trade agreements is also very important. So a lot of the women-dominated sectors still do not fall under these, do not come under these trade agreements. So it's very important to look into that. Ensuring access to technology and improving digital literacy is also quite important. In this day and age, it's essential to make use of e-commerce platforms that are there. But if I do not know how to use a phone, if I'm not literate, when it comes to digital technology, I will not be able to flourish my business as effectively and efficiently as perhaps other countries in the world are doing so currently. So with that, and of course, there are important stakeholders that come into play when we're focusing on these recommendations. There are civil society organizations, there are knowledge brokers like us, STPI, then there's development partners like Friedrich Naumann Foundation, etc. Right? So everything like Anika and I were also talking about earlier, we don't need to work in silos. It's very important that we have consortiums and collaborations so that our work and our efforts can bear fruit in all of this. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation and say thank you on behalf of both the authors, which are Dr. Waqar and myself. Thank you.
For this presentation within a short period of time and informing us about very important aspects of this report and shortly highlighting limitation, but also some policy intervention that also required on behalf of the policymakers. With this, I would like to move the audience to the next part of this session, that is panel discussion. And for this, we have very respectable August panelist from Sri Lanka, Mr. Asanka Wijesange, Dr. Salim Rehan from Bangladesh, and Ms. Kiran Afzal from World Bank. And I would like to invite their contribution with the same order. And I would request them that if they help us to understand not only their feedback about this report, but also that what is the contemporary drivers in their respective societies, which are going to shape the direction of, for example, the women economic empowerment, including their increased participation in trade and other related activities. So that would be very interesting, that if we can cover within the next 10 minutes for each our respectable panel members, that if they can reflect on these two aspects. One is that with respect to this report, their comment on this report, and second thing, that what the shape that they are looking at in future, the next 5 years maybe, and what may be the drivers which are shaping the future that you will be thinking about. Thank you. Thank you. So Mr. Asanka Wijesange, please.
Thank you very much. I think you can hear me. Okay. First, thank you very much for inviting me for the panel discussion, and it's very interesting discussion, interesting report. Thank you, Manu, for the presentation. About the key questions you attempt to answer, if we contribute from Sri Lanka's experience in those areas. Existing market access, especially the EU GSP Plus, is disproportionately favoring women focused industries like ready-made garment, because 70% of our ready-made garments workforce is female workers, and we can see that low skilled and rural based female workers are more employed in this ready-made garment industry. So the export effect, when we look at the export effect of the existing market access, the evidence is mainly on the labor force participation in the export sector. Female entrepreneurs exporting data is not actually available. That's a problem in answering this specific question, whether the existing market access are utilized by female entrepreneurs to export products through female owned firms. We don't know much about this area. However, if we look at the indirect evidence, we can see that female owned firms, they are mainly in an informal sector, and also these are small when it comes to the turnover. But if you look at the export data, exports are mainly coming from large firms, especially in RNG, ready-made garment sector. Existing and the new trade agreements actually can help female-owned enterprises, female-owned firms in different ways. One thing is, for example, Sri Lanka's current engagement with the East Asian countries like Singapore, Thailand, and Sri Lanka's strategic goal is joining RCEP. So these free trade agreements can be categorized as deep free trade agreements. They produce public goods like trade facilitation measures. For example, Sri Lanka-Thailand Free Trade Agreement, there is a clause for establishment of a national single window. So that kind of trade facilitation measures will help female-owned business, because the international evidence show that these behind-the-border barriers, like TBT and non-tariff measures, disproportionately affect female entrepreneurs. So these trade facilitation measures from this new kind of free trade agreements will help more. If you look at the MSME sector, about 70% of Sri Lanka's MSMEs, that micro, small and medium enterprises, they have registered. In that way there is some sort of formality, but female-owned enterprises, by the statistics we have, about 30% of MSMEs are owned by female entrepreneurs. So these firms split like 60% registered and 40% unregistered. So they are in the informal sector. And the firm size is considered large firms, more than 250 million turnover. About 92% are owned by male entrepreneurs. Just about 8% is owned by the female entrepreneurs. That's why I said that according to this evidence, it is unlikely that female-owned businesses are utilizing the existing trade arrangement. There can be various reasons behind that. One thing is the general low involvement of female in female entrepreneurs in business activities, and when they are involved, they mostly cater to the domestic demand. Mostly these are in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing means mainly food production. This is a problem in the South Asian countries. If you look at this development economics literature, you know that they used to make something and sell like that. They are more in this kind of manufacturing, food, especially food processing activities. It is incentivized because of the existing general protection given by the country for this kind of activities. Yeah, so however, unfortunately, female entrepreneurs are not much involved in service and trading activities according to data. For example, in this available firm level data, only 15% of female-owned firms are in service sector, compared to 23% in the male-owned business firms. Same goes with trading. So, as Mahanu presented, lack of access to credit and also the collateral issues. There was a problem of the land ownership in especially the dry zone. Now these laws are being changed gradually. Those things might have generally impeded the female business activities. So broadly, we can, and there are these what we call as broad-based issues. For example, as I said, the generally existing incentive structure promoting domestic-oriented industries rather than promoting the export-oriented or global value chain activities. And also trade facilitation issues, South Asian countries and also Sri Lanka, we have this problem. We are lagging behind the trade facilitation measures. So, for example, national single window. Very recently, there was this program to start a national single window. So these things might impede the female entrepreneurial activities. Other thing is the lack of female representatives' participation in these decision-making bodies. That's a big problem. Even in the COVID days, COVID response committees were mainly dominated by men, and female officers. You can see female officers actually in administrative service and the higher government positions. But the issue is understanding certain government bureaucratic measures and the processes involved might be negatively affecting the female entrepreneurs. But that understanding is lacking. So that's the problem. Just increasing the female representatives per se, as I suggested, might not work well. The issue is understanding there are issues. For example, Dr. Nisha Taneja has done studies about these land courts issues in India. There are successful policy changes. So these are the kind of best practices we can think of in changing the existing policies. So in a nutshell, broad changes are required. For example, changing this incentive structure in Sri Lanka, then the domestic resources, including labor force, will be allocated for these export-oriented industries. Female-specific issues should be addressed using policy measures. For example, access to credit is a major issue. Collateral issues in getting a loan for female entrepreneurs. And also the existing social norms. You know that in the COVID days, unpaid care work was mainly done by female, but female household members in the households. So this, especially the service sector trade, you know that there should be business contacts. So and when the processes are involved in complex bureaucratic measures, time consumption to get these things done is very high. When female entrepreneurs are burdened with the social norms and the expected unpaid care work, so finding time to do these things is very difficult thing to do. So this is Sri Lanka's situation about this. And right now there is business promotion activities going on as board policy measure of export-oriented growth strategy of the current political authority of the country. We know that they are going to establish Enterprise Sri Lanka. It is a broad business promoting agency by the government. So we recently provided some inputs how to make these institutes more gender responsive, especially given the high representation of females in the MSME sector. For example, increasing the female consultation, female representatives in these bodies from the private sector. It is not like from the government, but private sector female entrepreneurs into these bodies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vijay. That it was very important highlights about the prevailing situation in Sri Lanka. So I will come back to this one while concluding. So if I can request Dr. Salim Rehan from Bangladesh, if he can enlighten us about the situation in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I thank my good friend Vakar and SDPI for inviting me to this very important event. I hope I'm audible clearly. So I congratulate the authors. I think this is a very timely and very useful study, and very interesting findings which actually came up from the study. And this is something this will be very useful for not only for Pakistan but also for Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and I can see from the wider South Asian perspective. Now, coming to Bangladesh's perspective, very interestingly, if we look at a very recent World Bank study conducted by the IFC and Dhaka Stock Exchange, they did it jointly in 2022, Bangladesh tops the South Asian region in terms of women's leadership in listed companies. So this may give you a bit of I would say wrong perception that Bangladesh in Bangladesh the women leadership in entrepreneurship is actually doing very well. But that is not really the case, because it shows that in other South Asian countries also the women listed companies are not really, leadership in listed companies are not really very great. Because as the study has shown, and also some of the studies in Bangladesh, it shows that Bangladeshi women's involvement in entrepreneurship and trade is limited, with most women entrepreneurs focused on the national market. So this is, I think what Asanka also mentioned, that many of them are in the informal business and SMEs, micro and small medium enterprises, especially micro enterprises, and they are focusing on the domestic market. And if to give you some figures, that women still make up only around 7% of country's entrepreneurs, according to Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, and own only 15% of firms in the country. So you can see the kind of male and female divergence. And as with the women's employment, we know that though Bangladesh has relatively higher female labor force participation compared to India and Pakistan, and probably in recent years compared to Sri Lanka also, but still women's labor force participation is much lower than expectation and what it should be. So we have the lower female labor force participation. We also see that women's entrepreneurship are concentrated in a smaller number of sectors and industries when compared to male entrepreneurs, and are largely relegated to lower positions. So I think that is also common in other South Asian countries too. So when it comes to trade involvement in trading with the South Asian countries, we also see very low participation of women-owned firms. So now the question is, when it comes to the trade agreements, and how are women participating? So Bangladesh's trade agreement, if we look at Bangladesh's trade agreement, that I think the report also talked about SAFTA, but we all would agree that SAFTA is kind of non-functional. It is not really functioning the way the aspiration was there 2 or 3 decades back, but it is not really happening. Also, I'll just like to request a small correction in the report that there is no actually bilateral FTA between Bangladesh and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Whatever FTA arrangement is there, it is actually through SAFTA. So apart from SAFTA for Bangladesh, there is no bilateral FTA. But when it comes to even Bangladesh's trade with Sri Lanka and Pakistan, I think it's still much lower than what it should be. The potential trade, the trade is much lower than actual trade is much lower than the potential. So for Bangladesh, the most relevant trade agreement is, as you know, that Bangladesh in this region is a least developed country, though the country is going to graduate out from the LDC status by 2026. So being a least developed country, Bangladesh enjoys duty-free market access in a number of countries. The largest access is in the European Union market, but also Bangladesh enjoys duty-free market access in Canada, in Japan, in Australia, to some extent, I think 8% product for in China, and also in India. I think India has become growingly Bangladesh a very important export destination. And we all know about the ready-made garments, the success story, and especially the garment success story in the sense that ready-made garments employed a large number of female who were actually not, even probably they are not working. So they were working in any economic activities, formal economic activities. They are mostly in the rural areas, but this sector actually engaged a lot of women. But there is a concern too that over the years now, this ready-made garments is becoming more and more male labor intensive. So the female participation in the ready-made garments sector is also declining. So now I think the report has also mentioned that we can see women's participation in trade. I think there are two aspects of it. One is women as an entrepreneur and women as an employee. So there, and the challenges are different, and we see that when women as an employee, especially, that is probably the dominant picture in most of the South Asian countries in certain sectors, where they have serious challenges in terms of both, if you look at both the demand side and supply side. Because on the supply side, when it comes to labor market participation, I think I agree with the report very nicely. They have talked about the socio-cultural norms and different social and cultural individual characteristics. But I think the report could also highlight one, I'm not sure whether I have missed that one, that the importance of the care economy, because it is not only for the women who works as an employee, but also women as entrepreneur. The care burden is huge for them. So unfortunately, in South Asian countries, we don't see the emergence of the care sector, care economy. And that is something, an important policy conclusion implication should be there, I think, to let or to facilitate women to participate more in trade and more in economic activities. Now, I think when you talk quite a lot about supply side problem, I think we have a lot of empirical literature in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, I know, and in India as well, in Sri Lanka also, in many other South Asian countries. But I think the report also highlighted some of the demand side problem as well, because especially the lack of job opportunities, lack of economic diversification, several policy and regulatory issues, and the broad, I would say, the political economy of development, the kind of the economic and the incentive regime, which is generated through different policies which are on paper and some practices which we don't see on papers. I think that are also very, very critical, important, to have larger participation of women in different economic activities. So coming back to the report, I have few other observations. Is that one observation is that when you present the aggregate South Asian figure in certain tables, in few tables, we all know that when you have average or aggregate South Asia, it is heavily dominated by Indian figure. So we need to have, I think, in addition to this aggregate South Asian figure, it could have been possible, the sources you have mentioned, World Bank, World Development Indicators, and various other sources, it could actually provide disaggregated South Asian data, country-wise data. And then you could see that which countries, data is actually dominating. And in my view, because of the population size and share, it is actually India which will be dominating the South Asian figures, average figures. So that also brings, my another observation is that the report could also have some reflects on Indian experience, because we can't ignore India anyway. So because there are some interesting cases in India, there are some interesting figures in India. India is experiencing, despite development, low female labor force participation. But at the same time, there are some success stories of women entrepreneurship. So I think when it comes to, since this report is a South Asian report, I know that probably the way you did 3 case studies for 3 countries, that is fine. But some figures could be presented for all South Asian countries. Now, coming to some success stories or some initiatives in Bangladesh, I think these are also probably could be important lesson or experience for or learning experience for other South Asian countries too. I can mention 2 important projects, which apart from some of the government initiatives. One is that the World Bank, they actually took a project where they tried to, it was a pilot project. They actually tried to train 53 women-owned businesses. And the focus was on the, how to integrate them in the value chain and the supply chain, building their capacity, also building the database of the women, small and medium enterprise. I think that is something extremely important. I saw that in the report, you also mentioned something like that, but that is something which is extremely important. And also, I think supporting what the project was mentioned, highlighting, I think that is also very important for all of us, relevant for this discussion, is to support an enabling environment to overcome information asymmetries in women-led enterprises lending. Because we know that there are serious information asymmetries. Some information which are available for male may not be available for women, or they are read very differently. So this is something probably would also be very important. There is another project which was launched by WIPO, that was last year, which also in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Industry, they also targeted 25 groups of women entrepreneurs in various regions in Dhaka and targeting to, how to have the practical use of the intellectual property. I think this is also very important because many non-tariff issues which the women entrepreneurs they are facing, and a lot of new, trade barriers issues which are emerging, and these technical barriers to trade, SPS, these intellectual properties, I think not only women, but male entrepreneurs, they also lack a lot of experience. But I think women entrepreneurs, in particular, they face these kind of problems. Now, coming to my very concluding part of my intervention is that I think there are various challenges which the report has mentioned. I think I fully agree with them. Limited access to credit, poor infrastructure, and then bureaucratic process. And there are several lengthy clearance process, corruption, frequent documentary and other non-tariff barriers. These are very important. But also, I think one important aspect which I feel that in Bangladesh, and maybe to some extent, I don't know, might be for other South Asian countries too, the equal rights over properties by women. This is also very important because many of the properties are not in the name of women, and they can't go to the bank and they can't get the the right kind of lending. So how you can ensure equal rights of women on the properties? So this is also, I think, especially the inherited property. This is also very important. Women's access to institutions programs that support trade and entrepreneurs is also very low, remains low, contributing to the difficulty in establishing contacts and potential buyers. Also, we see that there are problems of workplace and market-based entrepreneurial activities are considered to be male domains, and work opportunities at vendors, purchasers, or middlemen are greatly restricted for women, in part due to mobility restrictions. So there are many studies which actually highlighted these kind of problems. This report, I think I fully agree, and I think Asanka also mentioned that there is a gender, the technology, especially access to mobile technology or internet. But we also, with some of my own studies, some of the other studies have shown in Bangladesh, there is a serious gender divide in access to technology. It's not only use of internet, probably you can have the access to internet, but how you are using the internet to promote business. I think this is also very important. But very interestingly, very recent experience I want to share with you that that there's some recent unrest in Bangladesh where the internet service was restricted for more than a week, and the Facebook was highly restricted. Then it emerged that many women entrepreneurs which are actually Facebook oriented, Facebook based, they are heavily affected. Very interestingly, these data, we don't see this kind of data in the surface or any kind of official document. But when the internet was shut, we heard from many women chambers of commerce and their leaders that this is a fact which need to be taken very seriously. So something might be happening already. Women they're engaged, they're using these internet facilities, Facebook and different other social media for their business, but it's actually probably they are not documented well in any kind of official or any process. So very final point is that he talked about the role of the public sector and the private sector. I think these two, their roles are extremely important. There must be some synergies of their roles, because often we see the role of the private sector very separate from the role of the public sector. And we don't see that they are actually having constant and regular dialogue. The public sector, in addition to providing the right kind of support through different institutional, deliveries or service deliveries, in Bangladesh, I think there is a need to actually undertake some important reforms in the taxation sector, in the banking sector, in trade policies, in industrial policies also. And also in the private sector, I think many of their initiatives still are not really gender focused or women focused. And I will just end by saying that there is a serious gap. And I think this is also not only true for Bangladesh, but also South Asian countries, that there's a serious gap between what we see on the policies on paper, especially on the 5-year plans and other things, and what is actually being implemented. So the state capacity, enhancing the state capacity is extremely important. And the enhancing state capacities can be done in isolation by also developing the capacity of the private sector. So I think these are the areas where efforts need to be put in place in a broader scale, and we can get some intended result. Thank you. Over to you. And I'm not sure whether I crossed my 10 minutes limit. Thank you.
Dr. Salim, in informing us very interesting insights about Bangladesh, and definitely we want to acknowledge that Bangladesh is leading South Asia with respect to many development indicators, including women economic empowerment aspect. But at the same time, but it's also important to notice that you also highlighted the challenges still that women are experiencing in Bangladesh. So with this, if I can invite Ms. Kiran Afzal, private sector specialist from World Bank, if she can share her insights, then we can conclude the session and open this for Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Arif, and Assalamu alaikum, and hi everyone. My sincere thanks to Dr. Waqar and Mahmood from STPI and Anika also for bringing this very important platform together. I find this report analysis to be extremely timely, and to me it is a roadmap for taking forward the very important agenda of integrating women in trade. I was looking at the repository of information, mostly through Google and also World Bank's own publications. I think this is the most recent one that has come out, and it takes a deep dive into addressing a lot of market failures and public sector failures that were not looked into at this level, at this micro level before this, at least for Pakistan. Now, having said that, the reason why I think this report is also very crucial, because we all know through our research that if we want to increase the economic growth and trade outcomes to at least 26% of global GDP, we need to integrate women into the trade value chains. Because by way of that, what will happen is that this will encourage formality of female employment. And by the way, there was a research done in early 2000s in Lahore and Karachi, which showed that the female empowerment and livelihood enhancement is directly linked to formality of female employment. So trade is an excellent conduit for doing that. Another thing which integration of women into trade can do is to push them into high value jobs. Because right now, when we declare export-led sectors and other high value tradable industries and goods as priority in any planning and policy document, what we are doing without knowing is that we are pushing women further down into the high value chains of employment and production, and limit their opportunities to participate in more valuable sections of value chains like production, manufacturing, merchandising, and marketing. And that's happening unconsciously because there's lack of gender disaggregated data. So in addition to having very conducive regulatory policies, it is important to also have socioeconomic policies on the side that encourage women. It will also help reduce the gender pay gap, which is, I think, happening across the region. And then somebody also here spoke about the domino effect by integrating women into these high value jobs and trade value chains. This will start bringing change, starting from homes and then communities and then at the institutional level. And I think the reason why this report also strikes a very soft corner in everybody's heart is because it talks about a cross-country platform, which you have enabled to bring to us today. And thank you for doing that, because it's important that there's cross-country exchange of information, experiences, just regionally. And I think it's very important that before we even talk about international trade, we should talk about intra-regional trade, because we are an extremely landlocked region, and yet we are the least economically integrated region. South Asia's contribution to international trade volume is just 5%, as opposed to sub-Saharan Africa, which is 22%. So we are losing out big time, despite the possibilities of talking to each other and trading amongst each other. There is another reason why at the World Bank we think regional trade is very important, because it helps bridge the gap between the trade volumes and entrepreneurship, and especially for women. So I'd like to also mention here that in the South Asia region, women are 36% less likely to use mobile internet than men, and they are 11% less likely to have a financial account as compared to men. And this speaks directly to the market failures that your report is talking about: not having access to finance, not having access to technology, and not having access to enough opportunities for finding suitable venues and opportunities for marketing and trading of products. One thing which we noticed during a Women Entrepreneurship Financing Initiative for Pakistan through the World Bank platform was that there were very enthusiastic women-owned startups who managed to raise $5 million within 2 years through extreme intensive hand-holding and bespoke training. But when we started looking at the profile, what has happened was that there was an unconscious bias in the portfolio, because a lot of these startups came from sectors like health, education, and low value trades or sectors. And the reason why is that there's an absence of programmatic thinking around integrating women into tradable sectors. And that starts with the fact that overall in South Asia region, about 3/4 of STEM students are male. So STEM is basically science, technology, engineering, and maths. And this is even more disproportionate for women or girls in Pakistan. And this is why they are unable to take advantage of the digital platforms and to end up in high value and formal sector jobs. So, another reason why the policy making and the planning needs to start at the very beginning of the life cycle of girls and girl children. Now, coming more specifically to the economic sectors, we see that in Pakistan, it's mostly the men who are dominating as employees and entrepreneurs in lucrative sectors like transport, construction, and of course, trade. The female labor force participation of Pakistan is around the regional average of 22%. And there is extreme gender-based occupational disparity, and that has to do with the fact that whenever there is an encouragement of a tradable sector, export-led sector, there's automatically demand for high-skilled women workforce, which we do not have. So women are getting pushed down into the value chains and into jobs that don't pay, who have a very low remunerative value, as opposed to how men, or the scales that men are getting paid at. Again, there is an issue of asset ownership, and there is an issue of connectivity, because trade is a highly competitive sector, and it's extremely mobile in terms of the opportunities that the entrepreneurs and big industries need to grab. And what happens is that because of cultural norms, because of time poverty, and because of lack of mobility of women, they are unable to relocate across the country whenever the industrial or industrial parks shift or move around. So women are unable to harness that opportunity. And then there is lack of information, which markets to tap into, which countries to look at, which platforms to harness, and how to access skills and training. So what needs to happen then is, and a lot of that is mentioned in the report also, that there has to be an emphasis on women's mobility and connectivity. That can mean ensuring safe transportation for women, both as entrepreneurs and as workers who need to commute across. Availability of decent and safe accommodations around the areas where the tradable industries, trade-focused industries are present. Also giving them enough information through information exchange, using cross-country platforms like these, and training opportunities with other countries, and also facilitating their travel, like the visas itself, because the regime has to then look at, through regional platforms, how to make it easier for women to travel between the countries. Like I mentioned earlier, we are landlocked, but there is an issue with the visas, there's an issue with the direct connectivities, and so on. I will give an example of how the World Bank helped Nepal and Bangladesh and India in this trade by also focusing more on women. So in Nepal, the women, through the funding given by the Australian government, are now receiving financing to grow their businesses, and those are in spices like cardamom. So Nepal is the largest exporter of cardamom now. It has captured that segment because financing was given to women entrepreneurs who were then able to move beyond just the harvesting of the crop to packaging, merchandising, and marketing. And so now they're moving on with that high level of, or high segment of value chain very effectively. The other thing that happened through World Bank contribution was the establishment of a Bangladesh-India border market, or border huts. So that has also opened up new avenues for women entrepreneurs across both sides of the border to be able to raise the quality and standard of the products that they are showcasing now at the border market, and also because they were given a platform which has suddenly enhanced their engagement in the trade cycle. So these are just some of the views which I wanted to share, and once again congratulate Dr. Waqar, Mahmood, and Anika and other colleagues for doing this. I think this has a great way forward, and I hope this gets heard at the policy level, and Pakistan is able to enjoy the not just the GSP plus flexibilities and the trade agreement, but also other intra-regional trade agreements also, because we need to start looking at those value chains and our neighboring countries first, including maybe even Afghanistan. And then think of moving to international markets like even Central Asia and EU and beyond. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rao, for highlighting
very important aspects of infrastructure issues, like, for example, technology and financial inclusion, are among the major challenges. And are also informing us about what the World Bank is doing in order to make the lives of female better, especially in South Asia. With this, if I can open for Q&A session, and we have among the online participants that our representative from USAID and from a few public sector organizations as well. And if I can encourage them or invite them that if they can start or open this Q&A with their questions, so that would be great. Yeah. Any online our. So if not, then I can invite my respectable participants in person. So if they can raise any question or, yeah. Yes, surely. We can facilitate, if you can raise hand, so we can facilitate with respect to mine. Okay, for the online. Raise hand. Okay. Yes. So for all our participants, so if you can raise it, so we can give you the opportunity to ask or comment on this very important session. Thank you. Please.
Thank you so much to the panelists. I just have, Dr. Rehan, you added a comment about including or rather excluding India from the study. Our objective was to study countries that are beneficiaries of agreements such as GSP Plus, and in South Asia, the three main beneficiaries are Bangladesh under the EBA, and Pakistan and Sri Lanka under the GSP Plus schemes. So this was why we intentionally left India out of the study, and for not any other reason. We actually wanted to show that despite being granted facilitative agreements and conducive environments, there's still certain barriers that women in trade face. Thank you.
My name is Fagan. I'm from the British High Commission, and I work in trade and development representing South Asia. So this is the perfect symposium for me, and I've scribbled all over the report. So thank you for putting this together. On India, just quickly, I think it does benefit from GSP still, but it's in the lowest tier. So because we replicated, the UK replicated that with our own preferential trading scheme, but it's in the most restrictive tiers. So Bangladesh, all LDCs, they're in the EBA, and then it's Pakistan and Sri Lanka in that GSP Plus section. So it's in there, but doesn't have quite as much generosity given to it. And that's the model that the UK reproduced. Just quickly, if I can just say a couple of things that the UK is doing on some of these, because I think it's important to kind of stay positive as well. And then I've got a couple of policy questions. So one thing we just spoke about beforehand that I think addresses, I would say, I think it's this one, the inclusive policy making. So we're working with Government of Pakistan and through Adam Smith International to do the first women's entrepreneurship policy for Pakistan. So I think that's been quite an interesting process of including women businesses in the policy formation process. So that's something that hopefully will come out this year. Through She Trades as well, I was interested in the Bangladeshi colleague as well online. We did a project looking at women's involvement in public procurement, because that is such a big section of like the government spend. And I think that's something that we could look to recreate if we have program spending in the other countries in South Asia, because obviously getting business through domestic public procurement can then obviously help increase kind of export capabilities. And then the other thing, we're doing a bunch of things as well, but another one that I thought I'd highlight is again through the REMIT program, Revenue Mobilization Investment and Trade, where we've done a training for women businesses on filing their tax returns. So bringing women into the formalized economy so that they understand the kind of tax filing process and aren't. My understanding is the problem was they were either not in the formal economy or being kind of ripped off by agents that were then kind of acting nefariously. So they're kind of three different projects. The two questions I have, and it's a bit more on the kind of trade policy angle specifically, was that a few speakers in the report kind of indicates that greater kind of trade liberalization within South Asia, more FTAs between South Asian countries might lead to obviously women profiting from that by virtue of being involved in these industries, often ready-made garments, etc. I'm curious to know, though, I think probably the reason that hasn't happened is because of the protectionism within these countries. So in actual fact, because the domestic margins are so thin, it could actually be safeguarding women's jobs, because otherwise you have this sort of undercutting between the South Asian countries. And then kind of related, this idea of interregional trade. So see makers know that it's regional integration is like 5%, whereas in other regional blocks it's much higher. Should we be encouraging more intra-regional trade, or should we be encouraging global trade for these countries to then access what would actually be much greater margins? So my job is usually to help with specifically UK trade, but looking at trading systems, we can help improve, the whole thing. But because the margins you're getting are much less within South Asia, there's a kind of policy question of whether we should be encouraging more trade liberalization and therefore trade within South Asia, or actually going out to those international and therefore more lucrative. And then a colleague from the World Bank mentioned Central Asia, which I know is a kind of priority for Pakistan. But also with kind of SAARC being as good as it could be and kind of acknowledged to be a bit defunct, like BIMSTEC, so South and Southeast Asia trade. I wonder what kind of thinking our kind of experts online have. Thank you.
Thank you for your very interesting comments highlighting the role of UK, what UK is doing in order to, again, the term I use, that making the female lives better off here in Pakistan. Before I invite Dr. Waqar for closing remarks and a few action points, just to conclude this one with respect to, there can be many interesting key takeaways, but I will highlight only one that I can see across the three talks that we have from the panel members. That Mr. Vijay Singh mentioned the role of collateral, that because of this, women are suffering. Very interestingly, Dr. Salim Rehan suggested a very interesting solution that if we can have this property rights for female, we can ensure that equal rights in properties. So that can make female very important clients for banks, and that cannot financial inclusion issue that Ms. Kiran has highlighted this one. So I think that also highlight again Mr. Salim Rehan point that there is a gap between policy and its implementation. So despite this, that these three countries may have legislation with respect to equal rights of women, but again it is a matter of implementation. With this, I will invite Dr. Waqar for his closing. Yeah, please.
So your question about regional integration and regional trade, I'd just like to say that, of course, venturing into the international market is quite important. But if the region as a whole is not integrated and connected and united, how can we sort of, have that expertise or that perfect finished product that we need to send out to the EU, for example, as well, considering there's so many trade requirements and sort of these restrictions that and quality standards that need to be met. And it reminds me of this one female entrepreneur who sells honey, and she said that she's been trying to export her honey basically to the EU. For quite a long time, but she's unable to. So she sends that honey first to Dubai, where it's then sort of packaged and brought to those standards. And then, it's sent off to the EU. There's one example, but then there's no integration within South Asia. For example, the border with India, whenever tensions escalate, it gets closed down. And Indian designers are quite popular in Pakistan. And for example, if someone wants to order a luxury dress from there, it goes to Dubai first and then it comes to Pakistan, although India and Pakistan are neighbors. So, I mean, there are things like these, and there's this statement that, I quote everywhere because it's something Dr. Waqar once told me and it's stuck around. Mahathir Mohamad, when once he was at one of the ASEAN forums, he said that, I hate your guts, but I want to do business with you. So I think that really applies when you're talking about regional integration or you're talking about global integration as a whole. Anika wants to add to that.
If I may also add, the thing is that yes, the margins are lower, but I think the volumes, the sort of markets that you have in terms of volume in South Asia are far larger than what you would have as potential buyers in the EU and the rest of the world. Another advantage for interregional trade would be the fact that the markets, the customers, the consumers are very similar in profiles, portfolios, and in terms of the products they demand and in terms of the services they require. Whether it's, and then I think especially for what South Asia lacks as a region is also stability. So to build into the larger political context, I think these countries need to be interdependent on each other to sort of work towards a more prosperous, a more secure, and a more stable region. And therefore, I'm all for global trade and open economies and open trade, but I think it is a multifaceted thing to promote interregional trade and focus on bilateral agreements and also all of these things. Yes, please.
Tiny point. Hello, everyone. I'm Aliyah, representing International Trade Center. We've been working with traders for quite some time, and I think it's a very interesting conversation, regional versus global. I hear you that we're sending our products, for example, rice and even the salt to Dubai. But one thing we've noticed in the 4 or 5 years we've been working in Pakistan is the lack of certification. If we keep relying on our regional partners that they're going to package our products and they're going to make them better and they're going to sort of process them so that they're according to the EU or the UK standards, then we're never going to have those certification bodies in Pakistan. And generally, it's important for trade, but I think even more critical for female traders that we have those certification bodies here. So then it's been very interesting to hear both sides of the conversation, but I just wanted to add in that this is one of the most emerging, for example, particularly for agriculture and horticulture products. UK brings big money. That's a fact, and that's what the traders want, be it a man or a woman. And if we don't have the certification here, if we keep relying on regional partners to send our products to them and then they package it for us, we're just missing out on a lot of potential profits. Thank you.
Thank you. So, to your question, I just wanted to clarify that to me, it's not an either or. Basically, both need to be pursued, maybe in parallel, or it's just a matter of sequencing. So if the region gets its act right and starts producing products in line with certifications like you mentioned and the standards needed, then that could be an excellent way forward. And that could automatically integrate the country into global value chains. Now, we are fortunate to have the GSP plus status. So we need to pursue that also. You know, Punjab has done a lot of revisions and amendments to the labor rights by, making sure that women are given the privileges and the benefits which the GSP plus requires and ILO requires. So that has happened. So the rest of the country can follow the suit. To get maximum benefit out of GSP plus, Pakistan, for example, needs to bring more sophistication to its textile exports and get better standards and certifications for the fisheries, because we lost huge markets because of the fact that we were not compliant in certain standards. So I think we will lose out again on the GSP plus benefits if that kind of high value production and certification doesn't happen. So both need to be then pursued. Thank you.
Thank you. And with permission from Chair, of course, I could sort of offer my vote of thanks and maybe next steps. So let me start by thanking Dr. Arif, Anika, my co-author, Mahnoor, Mr. Asanka, Dr. Salim Rehan, Ms. Kiran Afzal. I think this has been a very engaging discussion, and I would like to also thank all the in-person colleagues who have contributed to the discussion today. But I also want to point out our colleagues from the public sector who are very patiently listening to us online, and that's why I want to reflect the participants list over here. So we're joined by FBI, Pakistan Civil National Police of Pakistan, State Bank of Pakistan, UNDP, among others who have been taking notes and listening to us very carefully. I would like to really thank all the public sector institutions who have managed to take time out and be part of this discussion. I think this remains an ongoing endeavor. And when, of course, we had approached Anika and our colleagues at FNF, for us, of course, in STPI, this remains a longer-term program under the Regional Cooperation Agenda. We have been trying to sustain this since 2013. And of course, IPS as well as SENM, both Dr. Salim and Mr. Asanka, have been the institutional partners from Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. We have, of course, colleagues in Nepal. SOTI is a very well-known organization, of course. Colleagues in India, we tend to collaborate with RIS, with ICRIER, with NCAR, with COPS. So this is really an effort to bring all together to, number one, keeping the debate alive on regional cooperation, not just regional trade, but also regional investment opportunities, directly via third country, via online arrangements, of course. This is an era of digital economy. So we do understand that there are recent successes, examples of digital trade, which continues despite of all the political differences, visa difficulties that we continue to face. Just to sustain this effort going forward, we do understand that while, of course, governments or track one, as we call it, while track one effort has its own pace, in the track 1.5 and track 2 space, STPI, FNF, World Bank, of course, British High Commission is here, FCDO, we continue to sustain that space, that track 1.5 and track 2 space, trying to give a comfortable, informal space to even the policymakers, the parliamentarians to interact and discuss many of these recommendations going forward. So in the interest of iterating this report or this research work, we were thinking, and with permission of all of you, of course, we want that colleagues should remain connected across the 3-4 countries who are collaborating on this research. So at the cost of not opening another WhatsApp group, we don't do that. But we do have this idea of a LinkedIn newsletter, which is slightly less noisy, a bit more organized. So as part of this initiative, our program team in STPI will upload country-specific data, research, transcripts with due permission via this LinkedIn newsletter, and then continue to update it as we go along and move forward. We'll try to open the SARC-based organizations, including SARC Secretariat, into this effort, SARC Development Fund into this effort as well. So once again, thank you to all the esteemed panelists, in person and online colleagues who have joined. And of course, until next meeting, it's goodbye. Thank you.